Welcome to this session on the consequences of financial crime and the wider risk landscape. Financial crime is not an abstract compliance concern, it causes real, measurable harm. We will examine who bears that harm, how institutions are damaged, and how financial crime risk connects to every other risk category you manage. The costs of financial crime fall across four groups. Jurisdictions suffer distorted economies, reduced tax revenue, and weakened governance. Institutions face regulatory fines, lost licenses, and collapsed correspondent relationships. Individuals, including compliance professionals, can face criminal prosecution, civil liability, and career-ending sanctions. And society as a whole funds organized crime, terrorism, and public sector corruption every time financial crime goes unchecked. The scale of the problem is staggering. The International Monetary Fund estimates that between 2 and 5% of global gross domestic product is lost to money laundering every single year. Laundered funds distort asset prices and destabilize markets. Illicit capital flight starves developing nations of the resources they need. Tax evasion directly erodes public services and infrastructure that communities depend on. When a compliance failure becomes a scandal, the damage unfolds in stages, and each stage makes the next one worse. First, a breach is detected, often through a regulatory examination or a whistleblower. Public exposure follows, with enforcement action and press coverage destroying trust. High-value clients then exit, cutting revenue precisely when the institution needs it most. Finally, regulators impose fines, license conditions, or withdrawal. Early detection is the only effective mitigation. Once this sequence begins, it is very difficult to stop. A critical point for anyone working in compliance. You're not protected simply by your role. Regulators worldwide increasingly hold named compliance officers personally liable for systemic failures, not just the institution they work for. Personal consequences include significant financial fines, prohibition from regulated roles through industry bans, and criminal prosecution. That last outcome is a live reality, not a theoretical risk. Financial crime risk does not sit in isolation. It must be understood alongside other recognized risk types. Operational risk covers failures in people, processes, and systems. Legal risk arises from regulatory breach, litigation, and enforcement. Concentration risk reflects overexposure to high-risk sectors or clients. And reputational risk is the loss of trust from clients, counterparties, and regulators. Financial crime risk intersects with every one of these categories. This diagram makes the interconnection vivid. A sanctions breach triggers both legal and reputational risk simultaneously. Fraud losses generate operational risk and financial crime risk together. Concentration in high-risk sectors amplifies all risk types at once. And regulatory failure compounds every other risk category across the board. You cannot manage financial crime risk in a silo. It must be treated as a cross-cutting concern within your institution's overall risk framework. Let us bring the three dimensions of harm together. Economically, laundering costs 2 to 5% of global gross domestic product annually, distorting markets and starving public finances. Socially, it funds organized crime, terrorism, and corruption, directly undermining governance and public safety worldwide. Reputationally, scandals destroy client trust, collapse correspondent banking relationships, and can permanently end an institution's operating license. All three dimensions can strike at the same time. Here are the 5 key takeaways from this session. Economic harm. Laundering costs 2 to 5% of global GDP annually. Social harm. It funds organized crime, terrorism, and corruption worldwide. Reputational harm. Scandals destroy client trust and correspondent relationships. Personal liability. Compliance officers face fines, bans, and prosecution. And risk classification. Financial crime risk overlaps operational, legal, and reputational risk. Keep all 5 of these in mind as you work through the wider curriculum. Use this framework as your exam checkpoint when you encounter risk classification scenarios. Operational risk links to fraud, process failures, and system weaknesses. Legal risk links to sanctions breaches and regulatory enforcement. Concentration risk links to overexposure to high-risk sectors or clients. Reputational risk links to scandal, press coverage, and loss of correspondent banks. And financial crime risk, crucially, amplifies and overlaps all of the above. When you see a scenario involving any one of these, ask yourself which other risk types are also in play. For further practice questions and study resources, visit camsprep.com.